Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 687. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we begin year 16 with an interview, discussion, conversation, call it what you like, with Martin Foster. We covered a lot of ground, including whether the goal of any organization should be to be more agile and the 2021 Business Agility Report. During one segment, we discussed the statement, "The impediments are the path," a wonderful and thought-provoking start to year 16. Martin also announced the Open Transformation Playbook, and link in the show notes. This is a very new initiative to build an open, remixable body of knowledge for agile organizational transformation. To accompany this episode, he says, we've launched the first tranche of content. Go, enjoy it, and give feedback, and share ideas. Martin's bio. Martin is a senior consultant at TeamForm. His passion is working with organizations that are transforming themselves to cross-functional team structures with all the nuances, benefits, and challenges that this brings. With his past experience as a product owner and engineer, he enjoys bringing data into the people conversation. Are you ready to ensure that no cats were actually thrown during this conversation? It's time for the interview. Martin Foster, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Great to be here, Tom.
Well, we've had some fun getting here. And, it is sort of fun to be talking to somebody who's already in my future. Why don't we just dive right in? Why don't most agile transformations actually deliver tangible business value?
Well, I think there's a few things to unpack in this question. I guess what the research says so far, a little bit on what the research says so far, timeframes, and then demonstrating tangible business value. So the research point first. So over the past 4 years, I've helped co-author the Business Agility Report. This is something that the Business Agility Institute does. It's a bit of a community organization. They like to have a view of whole of business agility practices, which is a little bit different to, I guess, what other organizations might do in that space, which focus a lot on engineering, software agility. So when it fits in within the whole system. Anyways, so the Business Agility Institute publishes the Business Agility Report, which is, in my opinion, industry-leading research that's sort of driven from a broad survey, the results of which are analyzed by specialized data scientists. So we want to make sure that when we're saying something in the report, that it's based in, a strong system of facts. The survey is global. There's about 300 responding organizations year on year. So it gives us this really great breadth of research to say, hey, how is the world doing in agility? So that's it. And the survey is the whole of business answer to stuff like the State of DevOps report, which I think has done a lot in the past decade to demonstrate the value of the practices that lead to higher performing engineering teams. But again, we're looking at it from the whole business lens. Anyways, so in the past 4 years, we've seen that agile transformations from the survey do deliver tangible business benefits. So as businesses adopt agile practices, their ability to respond and to focus on the end customer does improve. And they also see specifically that they're better at responding to change or getting, products to market faster. They also see an increased employee satisfaction. So this is all great and all statistically significant improvements. But there's a caveat to this, I guess there always is, and that's the one on timeframes. So again, based on the research, but also when we talk to practitioners and from our personal observations, these changing a system of work, changing practices, bringing in agile transformation doesn't happen overnight. So when we look at the amount of time it takes on average to get benefits from the change and the effort, it's about 2 years. Now, that sounds long to a lot of people. But, we're talking to, and from the survey work, we're looking at a sample size of companies where about half of them have over 1,000 employees. So change takes a while. And the changes they're bringing in isn't just to how the business operates, but they'll implement how planning happens. There'll be some funding changes probably in there, and even how human resources practices work. So a lot of that effort, I guess, probably takes one of those 2 years just to get off the ground with small scale experiments before they really start to scale some of it. So having another year after getting off the ground to get us to 2 years to see tangible business value, while it might seem long, is actually quite excellent and fast. Now, I guess if you want to if you're involved in this and you want to get to demonstrating tangibly for your business, how do you help to show tangible business value from a change you're implementing, whether it be agile transformation or something else, without trying to sound too obvious? To measure something that's changed, you really need to have that starting point or that baseline to measure against. And I guess, unfortunately, from what we see, it's something that's rarely done, and even more rarely done in a quantitative way. So my suggestion is to collect a baseline with the information you've got at hand, regardless of what that is. How long does it take to go from an idea to approval to that idea to having something that's realized inside a customer's hands? In other words, your lead time, right? So get that baseline measurement across product work or projects that you do today. And often a lot of companies are collecting employee engagement scores too. That forms, as you're making changes, you'll be able to refer back to this baseline and demonstrate tangible change, but also have really great conversations when there's potentially a dip as you get started, because as humans, we're pretty good at initially resisting change until we're really sold onto it. But yeah, having that baseline will really help with this whole demonstration of tangible business value. And I'd like to say, proving benefits is a big conversation topic. Without spending too much more time on it. A couple of years ago, I had a great conversation with Professor Monique Aubry. She's at the University of Quebec in Montreal, so in Canada. And she'd done a huge amount of work throughout her career with project management offices. And a really great conversation topic with her is just that, how infrequently this baseline is actually taken before a project is started in her world. And hence the difficulty, one of the big difficulties that I guess a lot of people struggle with is exactly being able to show this tangible business value from before to implementing a change to afterwards. But yeah, so I think there's the research says there's lots of tangible business value out there. It's just about waiting for it and setting yourself up to tangibly demonstrate it.
So having lived a substantial portion of my career in the measurement world, I would actually suggest that what troubles me, right, and if I was going to be troubled by that, and I certainly hope...
The MeasurementCast.
There you go. Is that what gets reported is very much like a pear, right? It's thinner on top. So the stuff that gets reported is the stuff that, the transformations that actually do have value, and that there's then the big part of the pear, sort of like an iceberg, that's underneath the water that either nobody's doing those baselines or nobody is actually reporting on. So you've got data on 300 organizations. I could, you could throw a cat and hit a company doing an agile transformation even today, or doing agile, quote unquote, that has no idea whether or not they're getting value.
Indeed. And I guess that also goes down to the practices and what we're here to talk about today, right? If you're walking into a change and, you haven't taken these baseline measurements or surveys or talked to people, I guess that's where it'll be hard. But that's just an overall practice that we're, I think as an industry, we're really trying to cement in, right? Before you change something, measure where the dial is at first, This doesn't matter if you're building a new piece of software and you want to your hypothesis is it'll increase customer engagement or grow sales or whatever. If you don't measure it beforehand, you really can't talk about the tangible benefits you'll have achieved or even not achieved, right? Some really classic stories out there from eBay and Amazon and whatnot when they made small changes, but those changes actually didn't lead to the benefit that people expected. It's all about, setting yourself up for a proper experiment. I will measure beforehand.
Absolutely. And the word experiment is still, I think, pretty close to a 4-letter word in many organizations. What do you think the biggest inhibitor is to achieving end-to-end agility? Because, you're right. People started in the software world, but now we're talking about something that's significantly broader.
Yes. And I guess to answer this one, I'm also going to go back to some of the research. And again, I like it because it is the only thing that I think we've got to look at from a whole of business perspective with a global lens. And 4 years running, one of the biggest inhibitors, always one of the near the top, if not the top inhibitor that's reported, is leadership, right? So leadership styles, leadership practices, leaders saying, hey, adopt this new way of working, but then not exhibiting what they just told other people to do in their own practices. It's hard to be a good leader, right? And that, I guess, because we collect this information, it's just sort of proof point to that. But leaders can certainly be helped along. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge out there that's accessible these days. So like, hey, I'm looking to improve my leadership practices, or what ways are the industry shifting? What could I do myself? For sure, I've met a lot of excellent coaches and scrum masters and product owners that are leaders or can help leaders along. But there's, very much into play. If you're asking everyone else to do something differently, really work hard to exhibit those practices yourself, right? As we go on and talk a bit more, if you're the leader, then you're responsible for a change. You're basically responsible for proving that tangible value we just spoke of. So one of the things you should be ticking off on your box is, hey, did I collect a baseline from where I started, right? If you're a leader that's looking for a promotion or whatever, having that information will just help you from a kind of selfish sense, but it's also will move along, I guess, the organization you're working in. So leadership is one of those big inhibitors. But I guess what we also get, because I don't want to just put the blame on leaders here, other factors that come up pretty large in the research are overall resistance to change, difficulty scaling changes. And that's just humans, right? We love to complain about how something doesn't work so well. But then as we come up with our own recommendations, our own ideas that we want to test to alter, well, let's address this, right? Let's work slightly differently. Let's have very short, sharp sync-in meetings every morning, stand-ups. Implementing that practice then becomes hard on us. So we just sort of naturally resist it a little bit. And I think it's being conscientious that's just built into our humanity and addressing, concerns. Not everybody will be on board quite so fast. So I guess there's a lot of space here for communication, conversation, and understanding, I guess, people's objections and apprehensions just to make whatever change we're trying to implement better.
How important is structure, organization structure, team structure in getting this right?
I think it's hugely important. I guess, the way your team's structured will really impact the flow of work and also how quickly you can learn from that work. Did having those short meetings in the morning improve everybody's, contextual awareness of what we're doing? We won't know until we get out there and do it. And if it takes us 3 months to get approvals to have a 15-minute chat each morning, then they'll be very slow, to get that. So just talking about structures, I guess we started to talk about where organizations are coming from today. I think that's quite important. And if you're doing a lot of work in projects to start off with, then we might want to go back and talk about funding models around that. But let's just think a little bit as a starting point. Where are larger organizations and how are they set up structurally today, right? So the standard practice I tend to see, and again, this is a company organization that's 500 people, 1,000 people or more. Smaller smaller companies are just different. But say you're a telecoms company, right? A lot of them will be structured by business unit. So they'll have an arm that sells to residential customers, small businesses, another one that talks to bigger enterprise, another one that might have a wholesale product that other telcos resell. So basically they have 3 business units right there that are aligned along market segments. But then they'll have a huge engineering department that's responsible for delivering these products and services. They'll have a huge service and support arm that's out there for making sure this stuff keeps on working. There'll be other chunks like human resources to make sure we've got the people. You might even have a separate marketing department. But if you look at how, if you structure the business that way, and then you turn around and look at how products are sold and the value streams along it, there's still a lot of commonality that rips through these different business units. So say you buy a mobile or cellular phone service or internet access, or maybe you're buying data center space, right? You'll find these products cut through the business units. So a cell phone service could be sold to you from that residential small business business unit. But then it will use those engineering and network capabilities from the engineer part. And then if you have any issues with it, you'll be probably calling up a separate service and support organization. And then the fact that you're talking to that company in the first place might be as a result of an ad you've seen from the marketing people. So many organizations are structured that way, right? But getting the product to market or getting change to them means that you've got to do these handoffs between these larger business units and silos. And what tends to happen when you're structured this way is that there's a lot of waiting and negotiating before like the next part picks up the work. So if I'm the small, medium business, or part of the organization and say, hey, I want to make some changes to these plans we sell, you've got to go talk to engineering, and that will just take time and money. And they'll be incurred probably because of the organizational structure, which is a bit sad. And that's something we'd like to improve with, like, I guess, agile transformation practices. So what we increasingly see, and I guess, companies like Microsoft have been leading at this at scale for decades. So there's lots of proof points, but they're not just in the tech. Like we see banks, telcos, et cetera, adopting these practices and getting the value from it, is they reorganize their teams and how they do work around the value streams. So the point here is to reduce those handoffs that happen in getting stuff done, but also structure around, like these teams have end-to-end sight on those said mobile cellular services. That other team over there has end-to-end sight on, mortgage products that we might put out on the market. And structuring teams along this allows you to increase flow and the ability to respond to market quickly because you have less handoffs, right? That also naturally increases the autonomy of teams working on the product, so they get decoupled. There's less waiting on the central, like, massive governance body or whatever. You still get the governance you need, but you get less friction in doing it. So all of that helps the teams involved have a very high contextual awareness of the consumer and the product they're buying. So I guess, you have that line of sight to the customer. And then as the efficiency goes up, it also becomes a lot more fun. So I guess employee engagement scores and experience scores tend to go up. Basically, people tend to be happier when they can see that they can get work done and they're not just fighting process. So yeah, organizational structure, hugely important to adopting end-to-end agility.
So we wrestle with organizational structure, and we're still wrestling with organizational structure, even though I think Porter back in the early 1960s, came up with the concept of value chains.
This stuff isn't new.
Yeah, none of it's new, but we're still struggling with. And then, so let's say we get there, we have this wonderful flow. Has anyone told accounting that we're going to have to change how we fund work?
So that's a lot of fun, right? Funding models are pretty important. And again, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back from standard starting point for a lot of companies today. And that tends to be project-based funding, right? So, and I think longer term, what we're looking at is a big challenge is pivoting this project-based funding into long-run persistent funding for teams. At least for the ones that are likely to be doing ongoing work. So like projects still exist. You've got a small, like you've got to retire an old piece of hardware, or, you're going to build a bridge. Like there's still tons of like discrete pieces of work that have a start and an end date. But in the knowledge economy and service economy, what we see is most products and services or processes or whatever that are built out are intended to be enduring at the very least. So they should hopefully be serviced and owned by a team that's also enduring instead of spun up and spun down. So what do I mean by this? I guess we're trying to shift around to avoid the pitfalls of projects. So if you look at a standard project, it tends to have this spin up, spin down nature. In other words, in order to get something new done, there's this like unseen overhead of 3 to 12 months, sometimes more, where someone inside the organization will say, hey, this is a challenge over here. Like, we're not servicing customers well, or our product could be slightly better or whatever. But in order to address that, they've got to make an internal pitch, that for the investment to be able to make that change. And then that pitch probably goes into some sort of corporate planning queue if they're lucky, where, there's a couple of stage gates, steering committees that will say, yeah, okay, we want to proceed with this project the next financial year. So you've gone often 3 to 12 months between making this initial pitch, getting the money, so that you can actually start to recruit people and build this team that finally, when it's assembled, will start to do that first unit of work, right? But once you've assembled the teams, they can't just immediately go to boom, magic proficiency. There's always this like time needed to storm, form, and norm. In other words, to get the team to gel and work together, right? And to gain competency, even if they're already experts in that project-specific work that they're trying to do, right? Like, we are going to make this one knob on our online dashboard so much better, and that'll allow us to, extract an extra $5 of value each month for each customer that talks out to it. Some sort of hypothesis like that the project is working against. But they've all got to be contextually aligned as to what this is. So I guess that once they storm and form a norm, they can actually do the work. But yeah, they'll have spent all this, like this 3, 12, sometimes 18-month period just getting together before that first unit of value can be delivered, tested, put out to market. And then after they've done all this awesome work, which could take several months, a year, or whatever, often project-based structures, the funding will dry up. So the teams are disbanded. What they've learned might be handed over to a operational support or business as usual part of the company, just to just keep alive and running ongoing, but not really usually funded or given the power to improve. So you end up having like this, I guess, inherent waste in doing that from that spin-up time and from the knowledge that's lost in the teardown. So if you look at funding models, the big shift to support agility from my standpoint is to bring in the practices that allow these long-lived persistent teams to exist, right? And what we find in terms of actual dollars is that the dollars, like the sums of money, are similar to keep project teams running long-term as opposed to funding up and down. But you do need a different conversation with your chief financial officer, your project management offices, to sort of make sure that everyone is comfortable. And then you're still ticking, other incentives that are out there about how much work is capitalized or whatnot. It's a big shift, but keeping an eye on the prize of removing that waste from the spin up and spin down. And particularly, when you frame things like that in terms of opportunity cost, speak the language of the financial people, keep that eye on value, and we think we can shift. And we see a lot of the organizations we're working with and other practitioners we talk to, successfully implementing differences in funding models that allow teams to stay together and to just spend that time delivering value to customers instead of like storming, forming, norming, and shutting down again. So yes, funding models, adaptable funding models are hugely important.
Shifting from project to more product sorts of constructs, do you see that as being, we've talked about this for a while. There have even been hashtags, hashtag no project, as one.
It's a great book, Project to Product. Yep.
There is a lot of built-in inertia and people that have been trained to view things as projects, and projects are the only thing that counts. How do we bring them along into this new vision?
I think that this connects back to like being human and resistance to change, right? So the proposal here is kind of a wholesale shift in the way work is done. And that can be scary because something I find that's quite negative that's happened in the industry is that there's this undercurrent that immediately comes out and says, all right, well, then I guess we won't need any project managers anymore. But if the project managers have been close to handling the money, then that's super scary. So what you said is I should come along on this change and then potentially lose my job as a result. So I think that's completely the wrong conversation to have because I don't think that's the real intent. Instead, what I think we're talking about is taking that similar set of practices and applying them in a different way. And again, when we go back to like talking about opportunity costs and the time to value for customer, the value and the benefit that we're ultimately still trying to drive for organizations, you can frame things in such a way that alters the conversation and just makes it all positive for everyone else. There is a future. You still need to have, like, a good team will still have those project management skills in there somewhere. They'll just be called something slightly different. As you aggregate and scale, there'll be, teams working, together as teams of teams. The scale challenges are real, right? Like the third biggest challenge we found in the Business Agility Report, adoption challenges, I guess, are related around scaling agility practices. And this is something that people with project management experience, and I'm just picking on one subset here, or that have run project management offices where the dollars and the body counts are quite real, are able to help along in an enduring way in the organization. And this allows people to, I guess, flex muscles that maybe they haven't used too much before, like showing ongoing benefit. But there's a story in there, and I think it all goes back down to the practices, again, our leaders do, but in communicating what the intent of the change is, how it's going to come in, and why it's positive for everybody involved, right? Am I saying that, there'll be no job losses and no negative changes whatsoever and everybody will be happy and roses? No. But I think there's a lot of room out there for spinning a much more positive message, like a truthful one that brings a lot more of the people in the organization along the way. And I think on average, you want to keep those people because they're contextually aware of what your company does, of what your market does. So the more of that knowledge you can keep, again, the less of it you're throwing out, with the bathwater, as in like the end of a project timeframe. Does that help explain along that line?
That does help. Yeah. That does help very much. I use the term end-to-end agility in our conversation. I think you may have echoed it. Is that really what our objective should be? Is that the goal?
I think, and this is a great question, right? Like, is agility the goal? And I think no. I think it's just a way of getting there. It's part of that expression of the journey. And I think that might sound a little bit tacky, but I really believe it. I think if we go back to where we started in this conversation, we're ultimately about delivering some form of tangible business value. Or if you're working for a charity or some other sort of organization, there's still a line to value that the organization is there, a problem that they want to solve, something that they want to accomplish in the world. And I think it's about accomplishing that better that we're talking about here. And sometimes the word agile gets, there's some negative connotations to it because of people's past experiences or whatnot. But if we just frame it from, hey, I want to get better at delivering tangible business value, then I think we want to go back and first, be clear on identifying that the challenges on the path to getting work done and to putting processes in that allow for that improvement, right? I think it's a simple boil down. Like I didn't say, align everyone to your company objectives or retain staff or make more money. But those two statements, I think, of identifying challenges on our path or the work that we want to get done and the processes that allow for improvement on that path, they both lead consistently there. Along with this concept of, like if we're going to achieve end-to-end agility, like there's a couple of neat predictors we get from the business agility report work. And I think they play in really nicely here because the three predictors are three organizations that do the three things that organizations that do this well have is they have a culture or they built the ability to be relentless about continuous improvement, right? In other words, the concept that the job is done doesn't exist. It's rather, we have made something better, and now what are we going to improve next, right? And I think the tagline to this podcast plays quite nicely into that. But as they've got the culture of relentless improvement, it makes it easier to think of customer and hence the value streams, which is the second predictor. Organizations that are aligned along value streams, tend to have higher agility. And then, once we have those practices and experience in place, we all go back to, how we're going to fund that. So the third predictor is that ability to have agile funding models, but it all derives from that fundamental first thought of, what are the challenges on the path to getting work done? How can I allow for continuous improvement? I think if we stick to that, then we will build ourselves a path because we'll have this line to value in delivering, tangible benefit to what we're trying to accomplish.
That is so profound that just it's almost awe-inspiring. The problem I see is that everyone has a proprietary path to getting to that, and therefore people are always struggling to find one way of getting there. Do you see that in your practice, or is that just something that crops up in my mind because I don't sleep enough, or that the dog gets me up at 4:30 in the morning to go out?
I think what you're asking is there one way that works better? And, the thinking that can lead from that is, frameworks or whatever that are sold. And I have no real issues with them, but I think from an organizational standpoint, your starting condition, how you're structured today, what you're doing today, how people work together today, is likely to be unique, right? So I don't think there's one path as a result. I think the organizations that change well and respond well, they will absorb the bodies of knowledge that are out there. They'll look at the practices that are out there and say, well, right, how do we apply this for us instead of blindly applying some recipe that, sounds like Spotify or whatever, that someone else has given them. Instead, they'll be very contextually aware of what does my organization do? What are our specific challenges? What are the changes in practices that make most sense to us?
The fact that most organizations don't jump to, oh my context is different. Is that a reflection of the, as I think Jim Benson put it, sort of the post-agile industrial complex? Or is that just that it's easy to try to go for a silver bullet?
Sort of along, the human element that we've been talking about with resistance to change, I think it's a lot less risky to attempt to copy something that somebody else has done just wholesale. Like, okay, they did it exactly this way. If we attempted that way, we'll have been following best practices. So if it fails, it won't be my fault. And I think that speaks more to the cultural starting point of organizations, right? If you've got somewhere that's like extremely aggressive and failure is not accepted. So like failure means you're getting fired, you're going to get out of the organization. Then it's going to be a lot harder to, I guess, experiment and find the practices that work for your organization. And those tend to be the starting conditions, as in fear, or inability to fail, that lead to copying from other practices. And that could be fine, right? I guess it's all along what does it take to take those first few steps to trying different ways of working. So even the practitioners in an organization that has like a more fear-aligned, structure could just choose to copy the industry best standard because that's what allowed them to take the next few steps. The next few steps where you might be able to show a few like incremental improvements is what will allow the conversation to shift in leaders saying, hey, well, we find that we have more trouble getting good ideas out of our staff because they're fundamentally afraid of being ridiculed or failing and getting out. Maybe we should have a look at how we address that. So again, I think it all goes back down to take the information that's out there, use it to, accomplish the goals that you're trying to achieve within your organization. If that means, copying wholesale to get started, then maybe that's lesser evil than not doing anything at all.
Certainly a lesser evil than doing nothing at all. One of the great lines, and as I was reading through the 2021 Business Agility Report, was impediments are not in the path. Impediments are the path. And that has kept me amused as I've been walking my dog in the morning, trying to wrap my head around that and think through all of the nuances of that. What's your interpretation of that phrase?
Just to give a little bit of background to how I'm going to approach this, is I've been asked, and I've been involved a few times now in sort of establishing corporate whole company impediment management and processes. And I guess that's been eye-opening. I've seen some great stuff, but I've also become a little bit jaded sometimes. So I think maybe if I go back and say, what's an impediment, right? So I think of an impediment as a potential action we could take for improvement, right? And I like seeing it that way as opposed to specifically a problem because it allows you to like look larger, right? If I look at an improvement as something I could also put in a product, in other words, right now we're doing something that impedes the customer or a process. So how people get work done or how you release software to production so customers can use it, anything around that. If I take that broader view, then I guess I can say, like, let's see how we can make any of these things better instead of specifically focusing on a separate standalone way of like looking for and improving impediments along the path to getting work done. So from my experience, impediments are everywhere, right? So like impediments are the path rings quite true. But I guess if we take that product ownership or product management space view of it, like, okay, so we only have so much time, so many people, so much money. What will provide the best result and the best return? So, sometimes that could be a feature that will make us more money, right? If something directly affects customers. But sometimes the answer to that question will be simplifying a project that'll make it easier for a team to get work done. And I guess in larger organizations, there's also this really cool subset of impediments that are quite small, but their impact is magnified by scale. So if you've got 20 people and they've got to like do some expense management process that takes 15 minutes more than it should every week, that's one thing. But if you've got a 50,000 person organization where everyone has to spend those same 15 minutes, that number starts to tally up and, could be worth investing in reducing, right? So scale really matters here. So going back to answer your question, I guess I really encourage people to take a step back when they're thinking about impediments and get that better sense of value. What's the best value that I could apply at this point in time for the people I have to work with? And if that's busting an impediment, that's fantastic. But if it's making one of my products better, then maybe that's a better use of the time at this point. It's all about this relative discussion of what has the most value to get done now and then next.
Martin, this has been absolutely magnificent. If you woke up tomorrow morning, had the power to change any 2 or 3 things influencing how organizations adopt Agile, what would those be and why?
I love this question. So I had to think quite a bit about this, but I think my first power I would want is to apply an anti-stuck spray to the world, right? So what I mean by stuck, I guess if you're thinking about adopting agile practices or making changes, I reckon it's because there's a frustration somewhere there about how work gets done and planned, prioritized, all that stuff, right? And even thinking of why that work is important in the first place, just to connect back to what we were just talking about. So yet in practice, I feel in too many organizations, big and small, they sort of overthink the next step. Okay, so how should we approach this? Let's have a few meetings about it, make sure everybody's on board, blah, blah, blah. But this, takes time, and it's an expression of getting stuck. So my big wish would be this magic spray that just makes people think, all right, how about you get started, get going, right? That little bit of forethought is nice. Like, why do I think this next little bit of work is important? But beyond that, you really learn and improve by doing. So get started with picking that small unit of value and invest a small amount of time in trying to improve it, right? Or trying to get it done. So in that short amount of time, and here I could be talking like hours, days, less than a week, like really not much. You should have something to show. So for example, I was recently helping a team with consolidating a list of workforce reports that they were using and presenting to the company's leadership team. And there was a lot of uncertainty about which reports were important to who and why. And instead of just basically having meetings about this, we took a couple days to explore, collate the reports, get a better understanding what they were used for and why. And then in that couple of days, we then had something that was tangible that you could point at to drive that next level of action, And it could have been, well, hey, this is fine. Let's just stop here. And ended up there was a few more questions. But it's getting unstuck, getting moving, getting going that lets you have that higher order conversation, right? I'm coming to the table with something on the sheet of paper that we can talk about instead of I'm just coming to the table to talk and I'm not sure why. I have no evidence, to talk back to the tangible part that we started through. So back to the question. The biggest challenge I see in agile adoption is getting stuck. So if there was this magic application power to unstick people and get them moving, that's the first thing I would want to bring to the power. My second, I guess, great power would be getting more visibility on that question of value. Going back to what we've been talking about for any product, process, investment, you're fundamentally deciding what to do, what to build, and by extension, what won't get done right now, right? So as organizations adopt agile or agile practices, I feel this connection to value, that we want to be more nimble so we can do something. We can more quickly react to customers' needs, or we can adapt to a changing market. For example, as the COVID lockdowns came down and fundamentally altered how a lot of companies were operating. Those reasons for the change, they all too often get lost sight of. People get stuck again into the details of which agile practices to adopt and how, whose template should we follow. And they ignore for too long that question of value. So I think being able to express the value and keep that front and center in communication as to what the change is doing, it'll help leaders stay on board and keep team members engaged. And without this sort of engagement, it's a lot harder to implement those practices that enable continuous improvement, that align teams to value streams, and that allow funding models to fundamentally adapt to keep those practices and people in place, this year and the next. Those are my 2 wishes. Anti-stuck spray and a massive value beacon.
So, Martin, again, this has been magnificent. How would people continue the conversation? Let's just go there. How can people continue the conversation?
Well, I guess there's a few things. And the first one, for everyone that's that's listening, it's fantastic to be able to talk about this research basis. What works, what doesn't, which way are other organizations that are trying to change and improve the practices going. And to support that, There's nothing else I know out there other than the business agility report that covers this gap. It's been fantastic, over the past 4 years to have this research basis to go back to. So if there's one thing I can impress you to do today is to go take 10 minutes and fill in the survey and help us out for the 2022 business agility survey. There's a slight carrot in there. Everyone that responds to the survey gets the report, on launch, first to hear about it. So you can take those benefits and any practices and any observations, be the first ones to use them for 2022. The second thing, so TeamForm, that's who I work for. And I guess as we see companies adopting more agile practices, my own experience is that it'll feel natural to move funding to teams that will persist and own a slice of product or process like we've been talking about. And that's a huge change, right, from project-driven work. But to the best of their knowledge, TeamForm is the only product out there that lets you look at your workforce from a team-centric view, right? So who are your teams? What sort of skills do they have? What are they working on? What's that clear connection and context to business value? We're working on the rightest thing. And what sort of skills or labor forecast will your teams need now and into the reasonable future to keep on delivering in this space? So stable teams with a clear sense of purpose are happier teams. They naturally perform better. So if you're transforming over 500 people into teams, check out TeamForm, please. And then the third thing, I guess, we've noticed is that there's a market need for a set of open transformation practices. So I guess what we've done, and part of it has been the conversations that led to this podcast, is collated a set of practices and considerations that have worked not just in our engagements, but from a broader set of experienced agile transformation practitioners. Previously, the only way to get access to this body of knowledge was to hire a large consultancy. So today, I'm proud to announce that we've recently launched, an open source team transformation playbook. So go have a read, use it, and if it makes sense to you, contribute back. So the links to the business agility survey, TeamForm, which we have a free trial, and the playbooks will all be provided as part of the podcast.
Super. And obviously those will be in the show notes. Martin, again, fantastic. The platform is now open for you to promote anything you'd like. If there's anything else that you'd like to get on the table and say, yeah, please do this.
Again, I can only really reinforce, take those 10 minutes, fill in the business agility survey for 2022, and you and the whole industry practitioners will feel the benefits of the body of knowledge that results.
Thank you again for taking time out of your day and spending it with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
It's been fantastic, Tom. Thanks so much.
In Reread Saturday News, Week 4 of our reread of Agile Conversations by Douglas Squirrel and Jeffrey Frederick tackles Chapter 3, The Trust Conversation. Trust is a requirement for people to work together toward a common goal. Misters Squirrel and Frederick define trust as aligned stories. A couple of quick updates. First, an update on my experiment from last week. I found that I need to create a job aid for conversational analysis in order to practice the R's from Chapter 2. I must admit that not preparing for conversational analysis creates a scenario where I'm looking back and trying to remember conversations, which makes them more susceptible to bias. This week I'm going to create a job aid for trust conversations, then find 2 or 3 scenarios to practice. This will include the R's from Chapter 2. Next week, our first essay of Year 16 with thoughts on flow metrics and why focusing on flow is powerful, important, and causes people to run around like their hair's on fire. Hopefully, we can dampen the blaze down a bit. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people say, "Are we there yet?"